I'm really excited to be having this presentation on optical versus pass-through mixed reality that Karl Guttag is going to be leading. So welcome to the presentation.
Thank you all. Well, we're going to give about a 2-hour presentation. Is that if you've seen me on video or listened to me on the AR show or anything like that? No, I like the long form better. So we're going to give a 2-hour presentation in 25 minutes or less. But the basic topic is on basically optical versus pass-through mixed reality. And my background's mostly in the optical side, so there may be seen to be a little bias there. Let's see if we can advance the slide. Great, we're off to a good start. There we go. So, one of the things I always say is we start with Ray-Bans but end up with HoloLens. People are expecting this perfect image quality of a OLED television set, and what they get is something that looks more like what HoloLens puts out through HoloLens 2. So one of our big problems in the whole overall market is expectations versus reality. And part of the reason this happens is because if we take a look at a HoloLens 2 teardown, you see there are the waveguides that kind of look like glasses. That's the part that looks like glasses. Unfortunately, what's all this other stuff around here? We've got heat dissipation, we got processors, we got heat tunnels, we got all this other stuff we have to deal with, shields to protect the thing. So buried way down deep in there is something that you might say looks a little bit like Ray-Bans, but you've got all this other junk to support. So that's kind of how the difference between the virtual and the reality of this market. So I also talk about that we have, if we had a consumer, a technophile, and a scientist who's measuring stuff, looks at the same image. The consumer says, looks terrible, is it broken? The technophile says, it looks great if you understand how hard it was to make. And the scientist says it has poor contrast, color, uniformity, resolution artifacts. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I tend to measure things. As one person from a big company said one time to me, he said, AR, optical AR, is not twice, people think it's twice as hard as VR, virtual reality. He said it's more like 10 times as hard. And this is why one of the reasons why VR has lower resolution and whatnot. With VR, we take a big display and put it in front of your eyes. Very easy to give you a wide field of view. Optically, piece of cake. In AR, we can't put the display in front of your eye, we block your view out. So we have to put the display around someplace else, and then we want the display to be, the glasses and things in AR to be small and light. So now we have to use a really tiny micro display. When I say a micro display, it's something done typically on a CMOS backplane. So we can't put the display where it's optically best. We have to put it in a place that's optically out of the way. And because of all these factors, we can't do that. Also, anything that combines light, any kind of combiner, will do some damage to both the real world and the virtual world. The virtual image and the real image will both get damaged by what you see. And another big factor in AR, optical AR, is our black is whatever you see when the display is off. So when you look out and you see something, that's our black. You can't get blacker than that. There's nothing in the world that will subtract light from the world. And we'll talk a little about some of the attempts like Magic Leap and people have done with some levels of occlusion. This one slide could spend the entire I could spend 2 hours on this slide. The main thing I want to point out here is there's at least 20 major problems and challenges, and they're all interrelated. When you try to make higher resolution, well, you make the cost worse. You may make image quality worse. You try for bigger field of view. Things get more expensive, bigger, bulkier, heavier, more power. So all of these interact with each other, making the world harder. And one of the other things, and I kind of use this expression, the cabrioche maru. I'm not a Star Trek person, but summarizing is basically you can't win, can't draw, must play. every time you try to fix something, you make something else worse or you force other things. For example, if you want a greater than 50-degree field of view, slam hand tracking, because those tend to go along. You should go with bigger field of view. You want all these other things with all these cameras and all. You're out of a glasses form factor. You're into some kind of open helmet. I consider like a HoloLens an open helmet. Magic Leap is also what I would consider to be kind of an open helmet in a goggles-ish form factor. And they make some obvious trades. So if a glasses form factor, you're probably limited to less than 30-degree field of view. Another big thing for me, one of the big dividing lines is whether you can wear your own glasses. That's a big subject because you need about 23 millimeters, give or take a few millimeters of eye relief to do that from the optics. You pay for that. You pay for that in optics. You give up maybe field of view to get that eye relief. You may give up other things. You pay to get that eye relief. But if you do that, now all of a sudden your helmet or whatever you have can be used interchangeably. I think that's the big secret of HoloLens 2, is you can just put it on. And we'll talk in some about that. But once you go helmet and goggles form factor, if you go around the head, we have the old problem that people say, well, you can't wear it with various hairstyles and all. So you got those problems. If you're doing a bird bath design, well, you're kind of locked into less than 30% transparency forever. And I'm not sure, and when I think about AR or optical AR, I'm thinking like 80% is kind of the bare minimum to do transparency. You want to be able to see the real world. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of pass-through AR. So this is where VR with cameras. We're definitely going to get a better virtual image. The image quality is going to be better. Hard edge occlusion works. I just substitute the camera pixel for the display pixel. The optics are much simpler, much less expensive. The image quality is going to be vastly better. Cons, though, and this is the part, everyone looks at the pro list because they're having these massive problems in AR. It turns out the cons are just as big. The real world starts to become fixed focus. We can talk about whether you're doing other types of tricks and stuff to do it. But today, everybody ends up in a fixed focus world. You have orders of magnitude less dynamic range. The cameras, display, the camera display combination means you get a very flat world in terms of that. And the eye knows it. You have motion to photon delay. All kinds of problems come up with that. The real world does not behave correctly. No matter how much you spend, you could spend $1 million on a headset. It's still not going to behave the same as a clear piece of glass. Oh, and one thing else. Yeah, I oftentimes say what's hard in optical AR is easy in pass-through AR, and vice versa. And also, I see very little overlap in the application space. I think they're really two almost completely different things that both happen to be worn on your head. That's a theme. One thing I say about personal virtual boundary, there's no virtual boundary that's small enough to keep you safe or large enough to not be annoying. And that's very, very true. Everybody who's ever tried to put a boundary out, I know whenever I've used a VR headset in this kind of stuff, you end up making the boundary just the whole room because it's so annoying. And it's not going to keep you safe because you're still going to move your hand too fast and hit into the bookcase or something else you didn't see. So the overlap in requirements, there's actually very little overlap. When I look at optical mixed reality, I'm looking at the real world as top priority. Everything in the real world is the most important thing. That's what's up front. In the case of the pass-through, the virtual reality, the virtual world is the most important thing. So I tend to look at pass-through AR as augmented virtual reality. You're giving a little bit of see-through to it so you can find your mouse or find your controllers and whatnot. Peripheral vision is extremely important in optical mixed reality. Safety can be important. We're expecting when you see this that you're not going to be totally cut off from the world in such a way that dangerous things can hurt you. One of the things that we often say in the field is that your peripheral vision is to keep you from getting eaten by the tiger. Well, it's the same thing today, except it keeps you getting hit by a car. There's a lot, you have movement in the real world. By the way, and then of course with optical, occlusion is difficult and inaccurate. There's just no way to do occlusion. So anyway, they tend to have very, very different characteristics and leads to very different application space. One of the things I'm hearing a lot about, particularly with the rumored Apple announcement, is they're saying, oh, they're going to use this for a monitor replacement. I know there's somebody on the floor with a monitor replacement. It doesn't work well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. You have to look at the problem you're trying to solve. And I sometimes talk about the ice bucket challenge, where I say, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, I can do VR on, I can put the VR headset on, use it as my office space for a week or a month. I've never heard anybody say, and then I threw away my monitor because this was so much better experience. And there's a lot of reasons for that, some of which we can measure, and some of which are in this class if it just doesn't work right. Thad Starner talks a lot about this, and one of the points out of all this I'd like to make is that, if you look at a movie theater, 45 degrees, a movie theater, when you sit in the optimum seat in a movie theater, it's about 45-degree field of view. It's not 100, it's not 90. You may think it is. You get a tunnel vision when you go see the movie, but about 45 degrees is typically the optimum seat in a movie theater. So we say, well, we got this movie theater image problem. If the optimum movie theater experience is 45 degrees, how do we get there? And, immersion is what drives video games. But if the display was exactly, and this is the paradox of the thought experiment, if the display is exactly 45 degrees, what do? Do you move the image with the head? Well, that doesn't work right. When you move your head in the movie theater, the movie screen doesn't move around. And your brain starts telling you signals. That's not right. So then we keep the image stationary and we cut it off. Well, then that's very distracting. Your brain, when you see something cut off, your peripheral vision and your outer vision goes driving right into it. So we shrink the image. Well, now we've given up resolution. Or we make the image, we make everything much bigger. So we create a giant field of view with lots of pixels, and now we get expensive with image quality, impact and all kinds of things, because normally as you make these things bigger. And what I like to say is these similar issues exist for optimum computer experience. You kind of chase your tail, and on top of all this, it still won't work right. There's just this whole class of things where your eye knows things aren't working right. Same thing goes, and I talked about with the same experiment with computer monitor simulation. You need more than 40 pixels per degree, and most VR headsets are down at 15 to 20. You need more than that if you want to read text quickly. You can make it bigger. You can make it readable if you want to read at grade school speed, just dog and cat and stuff like that. But if you want to read efficiently, you need about 40 pixels per degree to keep the letters small enough that they're readable and where your eyes don't have to move so far to read text. So how do you support a wide monitor with 40 pixels per degree? You're back on this spiral. And if you solve all those problems, we go there and we'll give you 40 pixels per degree, I'll give you a 90-degree field of view, do all that stuff, still won't work right. So I think it's a little bit of a fool's errand. AR and VR, as I've said before, have different major challenges. The real world has infinite focus distances simultaneously. The real world works correctly when you move around. And no matter what you do in VR, you can try all you want, you do all this processing, and almost the more you do, now you get into lag. So you're always making these trade-offs. Well, I put 10 cameras out there. Well, I do all this stuff. Now how am I going to process all this and put this into your eye and make it work right? And we can talk about light fields and other things, and there's things being done in that area. But no matter what you do not get to the real world. You're just miles away from what the real world can see. I put this up. I find this an interesting contrast. This is me wearing a MetaQuest Pro, and on the right's a HoloLens 2, and they look a lot alike. You may notice, though, that the eye is a lot lower. What I'd really like to focus on is in the lower two diagrams. You can kind of see, this is from Bernard Kresta's book, and I've just modified it with some updating it for these two headsets. But you can kind of see with the HoloLens, you have in the green area, you have the display on the HoloLens 2, and then the light gray area is your vision overlap, and the black is what you don't see at all. So that gray area is what your eye couldn't see with the two eyes, and then that center kind of triangularly rounded triangular region is your binocular overlap, your stereo vision. You can see with like a MetaQuest Pro, you're getting out to 90+ degree, 100-degree field of view. You see you get a much bigger display area, but now you have this whole outer area that's blacked off. and there's a little tiny bit you can see out the bottom. Now, my understanding is with the Apple, for example, they're going to suck it up against the eyes with inserts, so you're probably not going to see anything of the outside world. So that whole bottom area that's got a little bit of gray peripheral vision will be black. This is just something that came up. Oops. What did I do? Oh, I wanted to show one other thing here. This is a contrast between a MetaQuest Pro and a Panasonic Shift-All. One of the things that happens is the Shift-All uses smaller pixels, uses a smaller display. By using a smaller display and smaller pixels, they've optically sucked it up, and now you can see how there's like no eye relief. You've sucked it up to the point where basically you can't see out at all. And I believe that's where Apple's going. You know, I get a lot of people thinking you can do hard edge occlusion optically, and you can't. And the reason why is basic physics. If I put a dot on a dot the size of a pixel on your glasses, you can't see it. If it didn't work that way, you'd go crazy every time a piece of dust fell on your glasses. So what happens is that the light rays go around that dot. So you can't do hard edge occlusion. You can't block the light for a given pixel because the light just goes around anything you block it with. We've seen Magic Leap try. They're doing what I call soft edge occlusion. I believe their blocking pixels, whatever you want to call those, I believe they block about 6,000 pixels. The one blocking element they turn on blocks about 6,000. They slightly dim 6,000 pixels. So you have this kind of, if you've ever seen it, it kind of gets this kind of gray, dark border region around whatever's there. It's an interesting attempt. Another thing they did is they used polarizing dimming. And the problem with polarizing dimming is right off the top, you lose 50% of your real-world light. I sometimes like to say that if you're blocking 85% of your light, then you're basically, if you're blocking 80% of the light, you're 80% VR. And if you're really going to be AR, I really think that should be above 50% and ideally more in the 80% or above range. There are some interesting things, one of which I just saw on the show floor the other day was by Shizu. But Metamaterials has got some stuff that's non-polarizing dimming. There's a company in England called Flex Enable. They've got some interesting stuff, and I just saw this Shizu Bear Sunny Technologies. They have something on the floor that's doing that. So we're seeing these non-polarizing dimming things that can get highly transparent. Let's see if that, oh, there we go. It went through its little dimming cycle. So you see it went from fairly transparent to there. Now we switch gears again. Pancake optics are the rage. Everybody and his brother is doing pancake optics. So the problem with pancake optics is maybe you're getting 10% of the light out. With a normal AR optics, you get about almost 100% of the light goes through from the display to the eye. But if you do pancake optics with an OLED, as Apple's going to be using, rumored to be using, you get 10% to the eye. You have a big power problem. So we end up with fans. So we have a lot of heat. So where are you going to put these fans in an optical AR? You look at all the heat management you see. I always say that amateurs worry about battery life, pros worry about heat. There are some interesting developments in the optical area. A lot of people are coming out with glasses. I've done an article about this on my blog. I'll kind of skip through this, but it's kind of showing you kind of the range of stuff. Now, the Loomis has much bigger image and stuff, so forth, but that's just a glasses prototype. It's glasses only. They don't have any of the SLAM and everything. The Digital Lens Argo, which is out there, has a much more complete solution in terms of they're doing much more of the whole problem. So you kind of are comparing apples to oranges here. The human visual senses problems, not all of which are there, and I've talked about this some already, so I think we'll skip ahead. Little simple things that we all know. This is Steve Mann, who's been doing this for forever. What goes back to '78, he's been wearing headsets. And he made a comment in an IEEE publication back in 2013. He said how important it was to center the camera on the eye. Well, you can guarantee that they're not doing that. As a matter of fact, I heard Stan LaRoque of Lynx talk about how it was important to have his optics thinner because that means there's less parallax, but you're still not centering the optics on the eye. And the brain knows, and the brain will reward you with trying to fool it. Head-worn glasses and monitors didn't take off. This is Glastron from 1998. They actually started Glastron in 96 as far as I've been able to find. And this one actually had an LCD shutter. So even kind of like Magic Leap, they had an LCD shutter. Those who may know, I've done a study of MetaQuest Pro on my website with their pass-through mode. Rather pitiful attempt. It felt like it's something that the researchers had ripped from their hands. Marketing said, can we do something? And they said, yeah, we can do it. But it's just the image quality is not very good. You can kind of see on the below diagrams, I've got the image that's sent to the camera, the optics, and then my view through the camera without anything. And you see how you've got blowout of stuff, nothing's in the right range and all. And you're going to have this with any type of pass-through AR. Theirs is particularly worse. As I say, you're almost legally blind when you wear a MetaQuest Pro. The desktop mode is a joke. The resolution, it's 20 pixels per degree. You get very little on your spreadsheet. The spreadsheet's too small. It doesn't work right. You don't get much content up there. If you put text up there to read, it's too big to make it read. You have to make the letters too big to make them readable. Nothing about it reads to me like this is a desktop. It's absolute silliness. Like I say, I think Lynx in some ways I don't like their optical solution. I've said this before, but at least Lynx is at least thinking about it as a pass-through. Most of these other guys, it's like pass-through was, oh yeah, we put cameras there, we'll pass the optics through. Lynx does a pretty good job of making things line up, the magnification right and whatnot. I still don't think it's perfect. I did not like their optical solution. If you look at this thing with any kind of detail, you can see that butterfly image has its problems. So let's talk the fun. The elephant in the room is that Apple's supposed to announce something. Meta certainly believes they're going to announce something since they tried to jump them with the Quest 3. But there's a lot of things that, and let's talk about this. Yeah, like I say, Meta decided to jump, and actually I like it. If you ever listen to Vergecast, but Addie Robertson, I've kind of struck an acquaintance with her years ago. And she's got a really good take on kind of what's going on these two products. But what's Apple Pro going to do versus the MetaQuest Pro? I expect it to fix some of the obvious stuff. They're going to get to 40 pixels per degree, but that's just not enough. I expect some things to be worse. They're going to have many, many cameras and sensors, but they can't fix all the problems with what goes on. I'm really curious to see if they do anything about VAC. We have thousands and thousands of papers about VAC, version accommodation conflict. One guy tried, Magic Leap tried, and then on their second generation product, they dropped it. So we got lots of people spending billions and billions of dollars. But as I often say, if mixed reality, if all it took was money and smart people, it would already be here. Apple, Meta, et cetera, can't buy different physics. I think that's about it. About 2 hours of content compressed down to 25.